Can people just mute themselves when they're not speaking? Yeah. Parvez Sahab, they can't hear us, I think. Parvez Sahab, if you could just mute yourself, please. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Amrit Wilson from South Asia Solidarity Group. Welcome to this launch of a very important report by the Kashmir Reading Room titled Disintegration at Gunpoint, which documents the political, legal, economic, and policy changes which have taken place since August 5th, 2019. It also provides an overview of the human rights violations, of which there have been so many, and the disenfranchisement of Kashmiris, which is still underway, a year after the abrogation of Article 370, bifurcation of the state, and conversion into two union territories. We in South Asia Solidarity Group are helping to launch this report in solidarity with the people of Kashmir who have suffered so many decades of militarization, horrendous human rights abuses, and the denial of their right to self-determination. We're also launching this with an awareness that India's relationship with Kashmir has entered a new phase of occupation, similar to Israel's settler colonialism. The last year has seen not only a brutal lockdown, but the longest ever internet and communication blockade in the history of any democracy, together with serious violations of human rights. What is even more significant for the future of the region is the BJP government's facilitation of demographic changes, corporate plunder, and ecological destruction in the region. On another level, it's just the first step in the BJP's expansionist policy of Akhand Bharat. While we're at this launch, Kashmir has been placed under curfew. And in India, the BJP government gets ready to celebrate 1 year of its constitutionally illegal move in an abhorrent and ghoulish display of fascism, choosing this day of all days for a lavish groundbreaking ceremony for the construction of a Ram temple in the ruins of the historic Babri Masjid. We're very honored to have with us today a highly distinguished panel of speakers, whom I will introduce in a moment. But first, I'd like to say a few words about the Kashmir Reading Room. The Jammu and Kashmir Reading Room, to give its full name, was set up in 2014 by a group of academics, researchers, lawyers, doctors, activists, and journalists based in different parts of the world. It aims to create an international awareness about Kashmir and believes that this can only be done by promoting freedom of political thought and dialogue, and by informing and sensitizing people about the political, legal, and everyday struggles of the people of what was once the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, including the frontier regions of Ladakh and Gilgit-Baltistan. It also seeks to foster an understanding between the people of India and Pakistan and all 5 regions of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, and sees this process as essential in facilitating the resolution of the conflict. It aims to develop a repository of educational material for awareness on political and humanitarian issues of the people of this region, through educational campaigns, seminars, workshops, demonstrations, and art. The report we are launching today has 3 parts. The first consists of opinions and analysis from a diverse range of contributors from India and all regions of J&K. The second consists of the letters, statements, and representations drafted by the Kashmir Reading Room, or KRR, since August 5th, 2019. And the third is a report submitted by KRR to the United Nations. This covers human rights violations under the international law, most notably the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, which has been ratified by India. The report has several sections, each with many politically important and fascinating articles. For example, the section on political developments includes a remarkable interview with Sampath Prakash, the well-known octogenarian trade unionist. The section on the law looks at the cases filed in the Supreme Court of India and the J&K High Court since August 5th, 2019. It also examines the measures such as the new domicile law, which clearly has the intention of creating demographic changes in the valley. The section on the economy examines the effects of the revocation of Article 370 and the lockdown, and debunks the claims that Article 370 had restrained development activities in the state. This section provides an overview of the deteriorating economy and the ecology of the state due to the prolonged lockdown, COVID crisis, and exploitative economic policies. It also examines the effects of the abrogation of Article 35A, which effectively does away with the special rights of the people of the state and allows the transfer of land away from permanent residents. This really is one of the worst aspects of this. The report examines these changes and their impact on land rights of the peasantry, the tribal community, and the local business community of J&K. It also covers the grant of mining leases to Indian businesses. The report also details the Indian government's efforts to create a sectarian and communal divide. We've seen that all over India as well, and analyzes how religious pilgrimage and tourism is used as a political tool for the state for this purpose, by the state for this purpose. This section of the report includes accounts of Kashmiri Sikhs and Kashmiri Shias who expose the propaganda being employed to legitimize the abrogation of the state's autonomy in the name of protecting the rights of the minority communities. It also exposes how the language of upliftment is being used by state agencies and regressive forces to pit one oppressed community against another, and in this way to effectively whitewash the human rights violations under the structures of Indian occupation. There's also a section on conflict and society, which covers the cases of illegal detentions, arrests, of torture, destruction of people's homes and property, and enforced homelessness. It covers the military strategy of the Indian state in Kashmir, including the heavy troop deployment immediately preceding the amendment to Article 370, the prolonged shutdown of communication, the arbitrary and illegal arrests and abuse of young children, and the denial of stable education, and the effect of the conflict on the mental health of the local population. The section on media covers the effects of the communication blockade in the valley, the anxiety and panic created, the disruption in reporting during this time of crisis, and the curbing of journalistic freedom, and the harassment of journalists in the valley through anti-terror legislation, arbitrary detention, and physical abuse. Finally, it updates us on developments since the fact-finding reports post-August 5th, 2019. And that is only a glimpse of what is in this brilliant report, which is essential reading. We are very proud to support it and to be able to launch it today. And so now, without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our brilliant speakers, the first of whom is Professor Hameeda Nayeem. She's the head of Kashmir's Center for Social and Development Studies, and she's a civil society activist. So thank you so much, Professor Nayeem, for joining us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this important launch, because it seems the whole world has forgotten us, and when we have people like you around who can still raise our voice which has been completely silenced, we have been completely strangulated, because anyone who even writers, a Facebook post is detained, is arrested. Therefore, you can see what is our situation right now, in spite of the fact that India has been making a lot of noise that people didn't come on the streets. But they forget how huge deployment of forces they have kept in the build up to the abrogation of 370, and how at least 34,000 people, for community leaders, politicians, civil society leaders, traders, they were arrested. And those boys who used to pick up these stones, who would mobilize the society, all those people were first removed from the scene. And then there are huge deployment in all the roads, streets, lanes, by lanes, quotas, whatever you have, everywhere, at every, literally at every doorstep, you had forces who were managing the streets and lanes and by lanes of Kashmir. And then over it, you had planes hovering over your head all the time, drones making surveillance of each and every individual. You can imagine what kind of fear is there. And then so many agencies have been kept after Kashmiris. NIA, IT, then RAW, and then IB, and then recently, few days back, they have come up with 44 officials who have been deployed to confiscate and attach properties of those who are suspected to be the supporters of insurgents. Imagine, this is the situation in which we are living. So I'll briefly, first of all, congratulate you on this brilliant report, which is all inclusive, comprehensive. It has touched every aspect of what has happened in Kashmir, not only today, but it has gone back in the history also. There are brilliant sections. You have political, as you yourself said, political developments, law and policy, economy, and then ecological vandalism, which is most of the times, put under the carpet, then conflict in the society, and then media, and most of all, this domicile law which has been brought, because the nucleus, the flashpoint of the abrogation of 370 was to take the plank from under 35A. Otherwise, 370 had been hollowed down considerably and comprehensively. There's hardly anything in that. But we consider as symbolic of the presence of the dispute. That's why we were against its abrogation, because it symbolized that Kashmir is still a dispute, in spite of the fact that it hollowed down. But it gave life to 35A, by virtue of which we retain exclusive rights over our land, over our jobs, or it was a kind of residual sovereignty. At the time when this accession was done, in spite of the fact it's interrogated and questioned by most of the Kashmiris, because King had no legal authority at the time when he entered into this, and Sheikh Abdullah signed it on conditional grounds that once the situation is okay, then you'll have to take back your forces. And then he never saw that day. In spite of that, he was arrested. So what happened on 5th August and before, that is something which is unnarratable, inexpressible, unspeakable. I don't have words to articulate what we felt, how we actually were made almost mad. We do not know how abruptly we were cut off from life. I'm using a metaphor as if we were put in Noah's Ark, cut off from the whole world, and around us there is a huge deluge, and in this deluge they are raping and mutilating our motherland, and we are caged inside this ark so that we did not make an effort to stop this rape, to stop this mutilation of a mother, which is also motherland. I think mother and motherland crisscrosses each other, because we have the same attachment to our motherland as we have to mother. And literally we felt that our mother is being raped, and we are being caged, we are being stopped from seeing what is being done to our motherland, how it is being mutilated, how it is being now taken over and sliced into 2 pieces, and then brought under the direct control of Delhi, whereby land automatically becomes property of the government of India. Just imagine, first effect is that automatically whatever government land is in Kashmir, it automatically becomes the property of the central government. Therefore, they don't have to ask anyone about it. And they have already made a land bank which are distributing among their, people, whatever they have to do with that. And then you have also seen during pandemic days how this second pandemic has also been used to facilitate and consolidate that occupation, which started, that mutilation which started on 5th August. Because on 5th August, it was a legislative murder, a legislative robbery, because legislature is supposed to make law, but in the name of law, in the name of passing the law, they are committing the murder of an entire state. They are committing the dispossession and disenfranchisement of an entire state. What could be the worse than this? And then blocking you from the whole world. Noah's Ark put people in the ark to save them from the deluge. But we have been put in the ark. We have been put in the process of dying, and Kashmir is dying today. We are not alive, we are just vegetables, because everything has been snatched away from us. After months, when this information blockade was partially removed, it was again done unilaterally. We are given orders, but nobody listens to us. It is unilateral communication. Kashmiri is not being allowed to speak. The moment he speaks, he is arrested, put behind bars, and all kinds of cases are brought against him or her, whoever it is. Therefore, it was again unilateral restoration of some communication lines, which again debars or strangulates Kashmiris from speaking out. And then you have already told us what has been the terrible, I'm telling you, this is the psychological impact that the entire generation is dying now. What happened to our education for the last 1 year? Children have suffered the most. This is the time when children grow up. And they do not grow up in cocoons. They grow up in open atmosphere in schools and playgrounds. They don't learn only in the classroom, as you have Google classes today. They learn through interaction. They learn through, playing. They learn through interacting and going around, going to picnic spots, having rides around. And that gives them a freedom to grow. But all that has been stopped. Therefore, this generation has been deliberately killed. Elder people were already killed, but this young generation, which disturbs me more than most, is the young generation is being mutilated. Young generation is being made ignorant. Young generation is being maddened because they are not getting an outlet. When children get an outlet in the school, in the playground, then only they grow. But everything is pent up now. Children have become violent within homes, and their mothers are not able to cope up with what they see in what's happening to their children. And then another impact on women. That pregnant women have not been able to be brought to the hospitals on time, and many of them have died, and many of them have lost their children because they could not be brought to hospitals on time. They could not get the doctor in far-flung areas. There are so many things which we can talk about, because I'm happy in the sense that you have made such a brilliant effort. You have brought all these aspects which have been impacted in Kashmir under this report. And therefore, it will serve as the first draft of history. It is not merely a report, it's the first draft of history, because you have compiled all these things which have happened during this time. The economic strangulation started much before this abrogation. That was 19 January and Feb, when they, in a way, closed the highway for 5 days in a week. Highway is a lifeline of Kashmir, between Kashmir and Jammu, and then on to other, places. But that was closed for 5 days a week in order to, on the pretext of facilitating the free movement of army and other forces. This was deliberate economic strangulation. And then you see other economic policies, as you already referred to in this report, that resources are being now given to non-Kashmiris. This is a plunder of resources as wealth of Kashmiris. They are being robbed of their economic activities also. Not only that, but their movement is so much curbed that economic activity and movement goes hand in hand. Without movement, there can't be any economic activity, and both have been terribly, there has been devastating impact of this stoppage of the movement as well as the economic activity. Now, our resources are now plundered because all these tenders are being given to non-Kashmiris, non-state subjects. And then once we come to this domicile law, this is the most devastating and damning, because other things you can easily change with an order, other laws which have been extended to Kashmir. But once the land is possessed, constructions happen, you make these enclaves, you make these settlements. This is to make occupation permanent. Earlier on, there used to be army, there used to be forces, but they weren't, we always thought they will go back once the issue is settled. But once you are ingraining them, making them permanent settlements in Kashmir, and the law which came on 17th July, which says that army can choose strategic areas for itself, anywhere, wherever they like. With the result, if they like and come to my home and say this is the strategic location for us, nobody can stop them. They don't need anyone's permission. They don't need anyone's NOC. They can choose any area and say this is barred for you, and we have chosen it for our constructions, for our residential purposes. This is the law which has been brought in. And through this domicile law, increasingly Kashmiri will be dispossessed and will be thrown out of Kashmir. Because if people don't have the relevant documents to prove that they're residents of Kashmir, it is another face of NRC or CAA. And we have already heard there have been discussions, we can throw so many Kashmiris out of Kashmir and take them to UP and give them small flats there and make them live there. This has also come in our notice. And that's why this is the worst kind of thing that can happen to Kashmir. Because they will now, once they bring in settlements in every pocket, the result is anarchy, the result is balkanization, the result communal tension all the time. As you yourself, they are generating communal tension in order to, support their cauldron of communalism and Hindutva politics. They are doing it everywhere, and they will destroy Kashmir. And then ecology. The choicest spots of Kashmir have been taken over by army or CRPF, which are out of bounds for Kashmir even before 5th August. Now they will be taken as permanent possessions of army, and Kashmiris can never see them. These are picnic spots. The best area of Gulmarg, the best area of Pahalgam, we have not been allowed to go there in all these 30 years. But now this will become permanent possessions of the army. And that's why I think it is time for the Indian soul to assert itself. Indians have not been so bad, but over the years, what BJP government through media has injected poison into Indian society. That is why we see so much of silence. Along with injecting poison in Indian society in terms of religion and this and that, they have also emasculated opposition. Today, there is no opposition in India. The moment Rahul Gandhi says something, they make a joke out of him. And therefore, Congress itself has been a terrible disaster. They have not been able to groom proper leadership. They have in a way thrown youngsters from out of their basket. The result is there is no hope today. BJP is all pervasive. BJP is all pervading. Today, it is the common Indian who has to rise to the occasion and see what is being done to Kashmiris. I think this is what is happening to us. It is unprecedented. Nowhere in the world does incremental genocide, incremental dispossession, incremental statelessness is taking place the way they are doing it under the garb of being the largest democracy in the world. I think with these words, I'll stop because other speakers have to speak. Thank you once again very much. And I hope some questions will be asked and I'll be ready to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hameeda ji. That was, well, powerful words about a terrible, terrible situation. So we're very grateful that you could come and tell us about it today. Thank you. So now we'll go to our next speaker, who is Sanjay Kak. He's an activist and documentary filmmaker. He's known for his documentaries about environmental activism and resistance politics. And his work includes the well-known and really brilliant documentary Jashn-e-Azadi, How We Celebrate Freedom, which he made in 2007, about the conflict in Kashmir. He is the editor of the anthology Until My Freedom Has Come, The New Intifada in Kashmir, which was published by Penguin in India 2011. So please let's welcome Sanjay Kak.
Thank you, Amrit, for that introduction. And thank you very much to the Kashmir Reading Room for setting up this conversation. But much more importantly, for putting together a very, very substantial and impressive, and I would argue comprehensive report. I might disagree a little bit with Hameeda ji here in that I actually think that more is being written about Kashmir in the last few years than I ever recall. And because I'm so used over the last few decades to a kind of abject silence, that I feel that that there have been a series of fact-finding reports, many of which are actually part of the Kashmir Reading Room report also, and in general, both in the international media and in parts of the Indian media, the coverage of what's been going on has actually been quite good. I, of course, don't talk here about the Indian, what they call the mainstream media, but we should really call it the corporate media, because they are inseparable from the project of the state. So I think that for us to have any expectations from them is actually futile, because that's a failure to understand the character of what that mainstream media is. But I think that, to me, the fact that we are speaking on the 4th of August and tomorrow is not just the first anniversary of the abrogation of Article 370 and the striking down of 35A, but the government of the day has also chosen it as the day in which to celebrate the Shilanyas, the laying of the foundation stone of a grand new temple at Ayodhya, which will come up where once the Babri Masjid stood until it was brought down in 1992 by a mob. So I think that the significance of the fact that the government chose to do this Shilanyas on a day when Kashmir and the world would be remembering its actions on Article 370, I think it's very significant, and we should comprehend its significance. I think that these have both been very, very central to the project of the RSS and the BJP. And one could even say that in some senses, it's been part of the civilizational mandate of the Hindutva project, both the establishing of a Hindu grandeur in the heart of India and the making Kashmir an integral part of India. So these have been, I think one of the things that I really appreciate about the KRR report is that right at the outset, they look at it in a comprehensive way of the undivided Jammu and Kashmir. So they're not just looking at Jammu and Kashmir, but they're also considering Gilgit and Baltistan and Ladakh. And I think this is important not because of some grand sort of Kashmiri hegemony over the region, but it's an acknowledgement of the character of that part of the world, which is to say that Jammu, Kashmir, Ladakh, Gilgit, Baltistan may have been brought together by the Dogra rulers, but that's not the only thing that keeps us together. The links between these areas, so the links between, let's say, the Kashmir Valley and Kargil, between Kargilis and Baltis, between Kargilis and Ladakh, between Ladakh and Tibet, it's a very intricate set of connections, which people from outside often fail to understand in their urge to separate these troublesome Kashmiris from the rest. Why I'm drawing attention to this is because I believe that in the severity of the actions taken by this government in its abrogation of Article 370 and what has followed after, I see a great deal of hubris. I see them sort of maddened by their parliamentary majority and not having an appropriate understanding of the region. And I think that the fact that almost immediately after August 5th, the People's Republic of China did sound out pretty dire warnings about what this meant for their relationship with, for instance, Ladakh. So, however much the government of the day might try to hide what's happening in Pangong So and in eastern Ladakh generally, what we have to also acknowledge is that a failure to understand that region has led them to take steps which have now embroiled India in a major confrontation with China. And it's not a confrontation which is going to go away. I'm sorry for this digression, but I think that it's something that I think is at the heart of the Kashmir Reading Room approach to the region, and I think that's why it's important to acknowledge its timeliness. The other thing about the report, which I really appreciate, is a very detailed understanding of what I think they describe as the control mechanisms by which Kashmir is kept controlled, and much of it are things that we already know, and through excellent work done by so many people, including JKCCS, and Parvez Imroz Saab is here himself. But for example, the chapters on Habeas Corpus, on the Public Safety Act, the constitutional rights, the use of constitutional rights, I think these are, to have them put down in a well-argued scholarly way with proper references, I think is increasingly important as this argument travels to other parts of the world and to an international community. Hameeda ji also drew attention to the ecological divestment of Jammu and Kashmir, and I think particularly the chapters on what's happening with forests, what's happening with sand mining, what's happening with land rights, each of these very appropriately draws our attention to what is going on. And of course, there are some excellent chapters about things that most of us don't talk about. For example, when we talk about minorities, we invariably are not able to move beyond Kashmiri Pandits. But there is two very good pieces on Kashmiri Sikhs, both by young Kashmiri Sikhs themselves, I think, and a very useful piece about attacks on Shias. And what that might mean, who is behind those attacks, what is it meant to trigger off. I think that this is not the kind of report that we immediately expect that people will suddenly pick it up and suddenly the filters will fall away from their eyes and they'll say, oh my God, and now I've suddenly understood what is happening in Kashmir. But I think it does it in a slow and incremental way. And quite honestly, as someone whose own work is influenced by scholarly work and by well-argued work as much as it is by political activism, I think that in the long run, this kind of solid research-based, annotated work is the foundation on which you will be able to eventually build a compelling argument. And I know this might sound a bit idealistic at a time like this when Kashmir is really being ground down under the heel of of an occupation. I think to talk at this time about spreading the word might seem inappropriate, but I think we have to understand that this is who we are. As I'm a writer and a filmmaker, and this is what I do. And I think I value contributions to this. And I know that in the long run, it affects the discourse, and it even affects the thinking of those young people that Hameeda ji referred to, the young people who are locked into their homes, for them to be able to read these things, to obtain these insights, and to match these insights with their daily experience. They don't need to be told what it means to be locked into your home, or what it means to lose a year of school or college. But I think to see the connections and the interconnectedness of things, which is what good research work and good scholarly work does, is, I think, extremely, extremely valuable. Lastly, while I have spent some time kind of drawing attention to the many complexities to which the report alludes, that is all true, but there are also some things which are very, very simple to understand. And those things must be said simply. And that is that the current situation in Kashmir is unacceptable and it's unconscionable. And whether it is going to be the people of India, whether it's going to be the political class, the international community, or geopolitics that's going to change it must. And I hope that with the skills, I would even call them weapons, that we equip ourselves with good thought, and an understanding, and a real clear-headed understanding of what is going on, I think that is the way of the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was really a very interesting talk. And I'm very glad that you raised the issue of what kind of country India is, and the fact that, there's been such a huge clampdown on anyone who has resisted. So, I think there are great possibilities for solidarity action in the future. I would now like to go to our last speaker, and he's someone who doesn't really need an introduction. Parvez Imroz is the well-known human rights lawyer and defender. He was the 11th recipient of the Ludovic Trario International Human Rights Prize by the Human Rights Institute of the Bar of Bordeaux, France, and the European Bar Human Rights Institute. In November 2017, Parvez Sahab was awarded the RAFTO Prize. So please welcome Parvez Sahab.
Well, thanks for the introduction, and I'm also thankful for the Kashmir readers for organizing this program. I read the report, and I'm personally very glad that most of the writers who happened to visit Kashmir after 5th of August, when visiting Kashmir by any civil society group from India was a big challenge. And most of the authors, they visited, they met, they traveled different places to know the truth. And the report which they have compiled is really very comprehensive and very excellent. I'm personally very glad. I mean, if we see before this abrogation of the unilateral abrogation of the Article 370 and 35A, without constitutional assembly and without legislative assembly, without the will of the people and without the approval of the people, I mean, there was a little space. I'm just telling you about the 1990 when the conflict started. Whenever there was a major incident and they used to prepare the reports, but after some time there was a lack of interest. And particularly after 2014, when the new dispensation by the BGP, civil society groups in India. But I'm really glad that these groups, because after 5th of August, when they arrived there, it was very, something very amazing. Uh, they show their grace and courage, and this is the output of this their visit. Uh, and also the way, for example, one of the authors that of the report, like Sampath Prakash, who was a trade unionist in 60s, and he was the guy, that who have filed a petition in the Supreme Court of India. But the one of the article in which they have mentioned the role of the Supreme Court, the judiciary, the cases filed before in the judiciary, by after 5th of August, the habeas corpus matters, the petitions challenging the internet banning, or the other issues, because how the Supreme Court of India didn't deliver any remedy to the people who have gone to Supreme Court. But if we see, there are two things. If we see the number one, we have to see that what has been the major changes after 5th of August. Not that after 5th of August, after the abrogation of the 370s, something new. There have been some 2-3 elements new, which Hameeda ji also highlighted. But since 1990, there has been the continuation of the suppression and repression of the institutional, in an institutional way, the way there has been the not human rights violations, but crimes against humanity by the army, who have been provided all sort of immunity, legal impunity, political impunity, and moral impunity, and to some extent also the judicial impunity. Even during the non-BGP governments, when Congress was ruling the center, and local, there were NC, there was the PDP there. I mean, there has been continuation of that. But what has changed after 5th of August? More particularly after 2014, when the BJP government, with their own agenda of the Hindutva agenda, that is, if we see the Hindutva agenda is that the Kashmir issue only can be resolved by the demographic changes, by abrogation of Article 370, and which, if we see last year, when the Home Minister was gave their speech, he said that the pretext was that the Article 370 is a hurdle in the full integration of the Jammu and Kashmir in the Union of India, or it will be for development. It will end the terrorism, what they call in Jammu and Kashmir. It will provide the jobs. It will allow the industrialists to come to Kashmir to make investment, which was all lie. We know that, and also the price of the land are low. And then the leading economist in India, even political, very senior political and credible politicians and political actors, they have been always contesting the version of the government. And we have the factual figures from last 1 year, whether the violence has gone down or not. I mean, it has completely gone opposite. There has been further resentment, what they call the alienation. I have been reading the article these days, which has been, they have studied what happened during 1 year, what has been the claims of the government of India when they abrogated it, and what really happened. It is completely that the middle ground there, a consciency which they were calling the pro-Indian, even the pro-Indian politicians or political organization like National Conference, PDP, and you see how they were shapely treated. You see, it's more pathetic to see one of the Congress former president in J&K that he is detained from 1 year in this home, and he is shouting from the wall that I have been detained. I have not been allowed to go home. And in the Supreme Court, they are filing the affidavit that he is free. It's not even the 5th of August we see when the Farooq Abdullah was detained in his home, and the Home Minister in Parliament was saying that he's a free man. I mean, wo moj masti kar raha. That was, and the Farooq Abdullah before the NDTV was almost weeping that I have been detained and I have not been allowed to go out. So one of the Indian had a constituency here, right or wrong, whatever reasons they had, whether they were extension of the Indian, but there was, that has gone. So there's completely what Indian political analysts who are very concerned, the things in Kashmir has gone beyond the control and by the policies of the present government, 2014. At least the Congress, who have been ruling India for most of the time, they have handled. I mean, according to them, I'm telling you that they knew how to deal the Kashmir issue. They knew how to address the fault lines in India and also in Kashmir particularly, because it was a Congress problem, Kashmir. And then they were, if they are not able to resolve it, but they have been trying their best to contain it by holding elections, by expanding the constituency, pro-Indian constituency in Kashmir, by holding the facade of elections, which have been always rigged during 1957, all the elections, whether 1957, 62, 67, and then 71, with the exception of 77, even admitted by the Indian political leaders like former the finance minister, that Mr. Jaitley, even Amit Shah last year also added that Congress had been holding fake elections. Even former election commissioners of India have been saying that we have wronged Kashmiris, we have deprived them of democratic rights. But this government, which is passing the orders, as was highlighted here about the most sensitive issue is here about the demographic change. The article, this Domicile Act which they are passing. Not only that, but if you see the laws they are passed very fastly. For example, the army can declare any area as a strategic area. What is the definition of the strategic area? We have not been able to get. The army has been exempted from the NOC from the governments for raising any construction. And these measures, the minerals, the natural resources here, by e-auctioning given to outside, if the government of India is taking these measures with this thing that there won't be any reaction. Two things happened last year, which was something very different. One was that after 5th of August, they knew after 2010 and 2016 how to contain Kashmiris. They use the psyops. The massive, it was really a very sophisticated way. The way they imposed the curfew, they paralyzed the whole Kashmiri society just to prevent. There should not be the repetition of 2010 and 2016 when millions and millions of people demonstrated outside the state, which is a nightmare for the Indian government, because of course they can't, deal with that situation when it becomes out of control. The way in 2016 they were taken by surprise. They could. So the issue is, number one was that in 5th August they used the psyops. It was a very sophisticated operation by detaining people under PSA, taking them outside, civil society groups, former Chamber of Commerce presidents, the Bar Association presidents, and other. There were hundreds of the people, and mostly the informal detention of thousands of the young people who were not even mentioned in the AFA. That was the number one thing. It was done with the purpose to silence the people. Because Government of India has still believes that if you are going to silence, paralyze, impose the culture of silence in Kashmir, which they are doing, and which they still believe that as long as they are going to silence people, they are controlling people. And as long they're able to control people, it is peaceful. It's not a state of war. And this is what they're doing. Now, other factor which I will mention here, when we are talking about the Domicile Act, which they're passing here, they of course the one of the very important factor in Kashmir is about the militarization. You know, the way that already they have 440,000 hectares of land. The military has, it is a statement made by the Mufti regime in the Legislative Assembly then. Highest because of militarization, they have already taken over land. There's a huge and further land they are taking. When they are taking the land, the militarization, it is they are taking our mountains, they are taking the springs, they have converted, changed the rivers, the small tributaries in different areas there. So they want more land, and they want that whatever they are going to do in land, that will be exempted from that. So question is here, it is now the rightly an existential issue for the Kashmiri people, because it has caused problems for the government of India. I mean, if we are talking about the internal dimensions and the external dimensions, I mean, external dimensions, for example, the way the development in Ladakh, which is, I don't know whether they really were, they were expecting it or not, but if we see these statements by the defense strategists who are very worried in India that they related with the um, uh, abrogation of T70, and then which is a bigger issue. But the internal issues are also, because finally, how long the government of India is going to control people? Because finally, there is a Newtonian reaction. I mean, you can't go and change the Newton's law in Kashmir. There won't be any reaction. So finally, I say that what is the option before the civil society of Kashmir? What are the challenges? We know this thing is happening, and still, as one of the guy was telling me that we are still living in the good times. Then what is coming next? So what are the challenges of the civil society, that how this truth about Kashmir, which government of India want to obfuscate, and after 5th of August, they have been, uh, the way they want to, more particularly the corporate media, as Sanjay was saying, that how we can, the reality of Kashmir, how we reach to the international institutions. But one thing is also very important, that as for the conduct of the Indian government, this party, the way they are uh, um, affecting the image of India, which was assiduously built by the Congress and other parties throughout the world, the soft power, the democratic, secular, and so I think that this government has, that it is affecting the image of India. And in that context, I say that because the reality about the Kashmir, which has got more attention after the 5th of August, I don't think there was that attention. I have been watching the Kashmiri diaspora, particularly the young people. I mean, it was not in 1990s. They are trying to institutionalize their groups. I think that the challenge is that how we can't go and start weeping and this mourning, but the challenge is that how can we widen the conscience, how we reach to the international conscience of conscience, because if they can take a position on the Palestine, if they can a position of the other conflict area, if there was a conscience of conscience in South Africa, against the apartheid. So how we can widen it? Because I'm convinced that the government of India is not going to, I mean, they will not be concerned by the internal, the outcry. I'm telling you, within India, But I think that they can't ignore the concerns from the global civil society, and that is the challenge. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Parvez Sahab. Well, it's been a really, really interesting discussion so far. Can I just ask the panelists to send us some questions? In the meantime, I think, you know, what has come out for me is the way in which all of you have touched on the changes, the difference between having a BJP government and the earlier phase. And I think this is so important, and it has to affect the way in which we mobilize internationally as well, because that is now so very important for us. So have we got any questions yet? I don't know whether some questions have come up on the Facebook, for Facebook viewers.
I can read a question which has come up on one of these windows. I don't know which window that is. It's for Hameeda ji. And it says,
yes,
Professor...
Yes, that's right. Okay. And it's okay, I'll read it.
You read it.
How do you view the recent order of firing state officials suspected of undertaking anti-national activities without even initiating inquiry, especially when government services form one of the largest economic sectors in J&K? Please unmute yourself. Hameeda ji, please unmute yourself.
Oh, I said this order I saw today in the paper, in which they have said 500 to 1,000 government employees will be dismissed who are suspect to have, you know, sympathy with people who have, they say we don't need to launch any inquiry into it. No investigation is needed. But we have records through different social media, this and that. On that basis, we can dismiss them. They can't go in the court, because earlier on they had sued some of the, dismissed some of the employees, but when they went to the court, it could not stand the test of, proof. That's why they were again reinstated. But this time they have kept no option. This is another draconian, order which has come. This is again to silence people completely. Again, to strangulate them, so that they never raise a whiff of dissent in whatever is being done to. Because now they are going on a fast track. We used to run a campaign to save 35A before it was removed in the last 2-3 years. I mean, 2018-19, we were, running this campaign, advocacy, that it should not be removed. People should understand what, if it is removed, what will happen. At that time, I used to tell people, some people will say, even if they remove it, nobody will come here. I said, no, this is the dark fantasy of RSS. They have to bring in people by force and settle them here. It is not that no Indian will come here because a cold place, they can't survive and they can't live here. That the investor will not find it a very, very congenial atmosphere to make profit here, and he will not come. But they have started bringing people here in buses, in trucks, and taking them to Kupwara district, to Badgam district, and putting them as laborers or something else. So in the same way, today they are now completely silencing everyone. This is another move toward the same direction.
Right. And does anyone else want to say anything? Parvez Sahab or Sanjay, do you want to say something?
Well, I would add one thing, that, in the name of security, in the name of the security of India and the national, I think otherwise this provision was already there, without inquiry, but it was it was to be used very in a rare way. But now they have, I think I as a lawyer, I believe this thing, that there has been law, they can do anything under the under that name of the threat to the integrity. You know, as you have the PSA laws and the UAP, other things. So I'm really not surprised, you know, and it is with the intention, because the Kashmir has the highest the employment. If you see, I think 500,000 the government employees. It is just to control them, just to discipline them, as Hameeda ji said, just to silence.
Can I just add one thing here? I think that it's important to remember that the state is acting with a considerable sense of judicial impunity, in that it knows that no matter what steps it takes, higher courts of appeal are not going to lean in on the side necessarily of justice. So if we just take the internet shutdown, then although the high courts and later the Supreme Courts are able to recognize the validity of the argument that the internet is a human right, but they will still hand over the administrative decision taking over that back to the government. So for us to be debating on whether or not there is going to be a judicial leg for these actions against government servants, I think in the present climate of the way the courts are functioning, I think this is a completely, it's a non-conversation as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you look at the experience of India and the way in which the RSS people, BJP supporters have been put in key positions in the judiciary, in the government, you know, the usual channels are all blocked at the moment, to be honest, but obviously we hope otherwise. Anyway, there's another question which says, what are your thoughts on the response or lack of it of the J&K High Court in cases concerning arbitrary detentions? How does one go about in trying to understand the role of this court as an extension of the state in Kashmir? What is the legal frame through which one should study it? This is really to Parvez.
Yeah. You see, the judiciary is part of the state, right? And the judges are appointed by the executive. And notwithstanding, the powers of the High Court judges in J&K have not been curtailed, you know, because in J&K there's no such martial law. I mean, blah blah. They have the same powers as the High Court judges in other states have. The way you know, we have that in there's Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, which gives right to life and liberty, which was widened, you know, by the interpretation by the Supreme Court, and the major judgments by the Supreme Court of India, the local high courts have never, because you know the reality is that the reality is not the powers they have. The reality is that how independently they will exercise these powers. The judges here, as a practicing lawyer from more than 30 years, that the way after 1990, the way judges have capitulated. Because otherwise the judiciary is hesitant to interfere in matters where the state says or the security issue. They are very hesitant in that. And they have self-imposed limitations, the judges, because they don't want to confront the executive. They don't want to, you know, even in the cases as a lawyer I have been dealing, you know, the habeas corpus matters or other cases, you know, they are not that independent. You know, I can give an example of the one case, Kunan Poshpara case, which almost everybody in Kashmir and outside knows, who's interested in Kashmir, of course, that it is the J&K High Court which has granted stay in investigation. There should not be any further investigation. I mean, it is completely contrary, because we know how they were managed. Then the judges also are not that independent, they are always facing a sword of Damocles that they should not be transferred. For example, the passport case of Hameeda ji, she has applied for the passport there. And not only she, because she has been denied the passport, which I don't know whether she got it or not.
No,
And
for 16 years I don't have it.
even there are 40,000 people who have indexed. They have been petitioning the High Court. Even the bar president who was deprived of passport, they have been, under law, they have to get, because there are the laws, laid down by the Supreme Court of India that it is the fundamental right, and then even according to international civil and political rights, which India has ratified, that it has the right to travel people can leave the country and return to country. It is a right internationally recognized. But they are not, because they don't want to confront the state. They don't want to take the cudgels with the executive. And reason is because they have, number one is also the corruption. Not that the judges are not corrupt. Secondly, that we have, I'm always very persuading my friends in the courts who are lawyer activists that there should be the judges since 1990, how they have been complicit by their omissions in not doing, take measures to, because the judges were under the constitutional law, the police wala and the army man is not the constitutional law. They have been on the constitution to protect the humors of the cities. They have failed to that, except even the refugees or those who have shown the audacity, who have confronted the state. But normally, realistic speaking, that you see now the condition of the Indian Supreme Court. At least only Indian Supreme Court at least was at capitulated urgency. The judges, they even said as right to the Indian citizens, exception of Justice Kak, who should give a very historical reason. But now, even in India, the way judgments are coming is very worrisome for the legal fraternity there. And then you see Justice Muralidharan, that who passed the order, how he was, transferred. So we cannot say the judiciary is not in isolation. And when in the conflict area, there is otherwise very old saying that when the arms are raised, laws remain silent. So judges are, because of their omissions and because of their inaction, their omissions are equally, than the commissions of the executive that in the human rights. I am not, it's not only in Kashmir. If you see in Israel, what Israeli Supreme Court, which is the only judicial in the Middle East, that what are the judgments? They say occupation of justice. See the judgments, whether there's a deportation or arrest of the Palestinian West Bank, the torture, and then the target assassination. They have approved that. Even in US, we see that if we read the article of Edward Zand, that how the judiciary, approved or rejected when the petitions were filed in the US Supreme Court for ending the war in Vietnam and others. So I'm not very surprised what the judges are.
Okay. We now have a question about the diaspora. So questioner asks, what more do you think could the diaspora be doing? Do you have any suggestions?
What? Pardon?
The diaspora, could they be doing more? And if so, what could they be doing? Any suggestions?
Suggestions. We'll have to think over the suggestions, then give them forward. But we do appreciate the diaspora so far. This time they have been very active. And if voices have come, they have come from our, we are very thankful to them. But they have to sustain their efforts and keep on raising the issue, not lose their enthusiasm, not lose their hope. Because if they keep on raising the voice and in a sustained manner, I think the world order is changing and will definitely see the fruits of their efforts, inshallah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I wanted to add to this and say that one of the most encouraging things about the last few years is the participation of both young Kashmiris and non-Kashmiris outside India and even in India. And what is interesting about the young Kashmiris who are participating in the conversation around Kashmir is that many of them have actually very little contact with Kashmir. They are coming to it through reading about it. So it's not nostalgia. The previous generation tended to be more nostalgic than politically, how should I say, assertive. You know, they felt very deeply, but were probably not able to do as much. But there is a new, very politicized, very sharp young generation all across the world who have read everything. They are up with the arguments. And I think they are very, very effective spokeswomen and spokespersons for the Kashmir issue. And I really congratulate them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, the next question also coming via the Instagram is that have you any suggestions on how the land rights could be protected?
What could we say? When you throw to winds all the legal documents, when you throw to winds all your commitments, when you're driven by your arrogance and your fascism. I mean, whatever Indian government, the BJP government especially did so far, this is all illegal. And therefore, which ways could you, I mean, we people are very powerless here. We have no arms. We cannot fight them back. We are not equal to the task. As long as they continue with their arrogance, they're drunk with power, as long as they continue with their fascism, which flouts all principles and all values, all basic principles of justice and democracy and freedom, they will continue to do it. But there is one way that we can bring in greater international pressure on the government of India to stop this operation.
Anybody else want to say anything? No? So then there's a question about how do you see the future of Kashmir? Like, for example, the next 10 years, how do you foresee that?
What could we foresee right now? Right now, there is darkness all around, but we know that in history is a great teacher that no fascism lives for a long time. It will die its own death. It will prey upon itself. Sooner or later, it will not take more time. And we hope that also the world order is changing, because India, by abrogating Article 370, has also destabilized the entire nation and made China also party to the dispute. And today, India has made herself vulnerable, because it is 4,000 kilometer border with China. The entire area has become vulnerable. And now they are mobilizing forces all over. So China will actually hollow them economically also this way. And that is why that will pressurize them to come to the table finally. Because they cannot live in this kind of state in which they have kept us. China is now keeping them in that state, in which they kept us for 30 years particularly. And I don't think the state of affairs can go for a long time. And I think finally good sense has to prevail. Logic says that ultimately this dark fantasy will die. It will also be worn out, and it will not sustain, provided Indian people also rise to the occasion. And I think then they will come to the table, because now it is not only India, Pakistan, Kashmir, it is China also party. And China is not going to take it easy now. And that way there is a ray of hope for us.
Okay. Well, that's certainly indisputable. I mean, resistance has to succeed. You know, there's no way you can keep people oppressed forever. So one more question of how do you want the progressive blocs in India to notch up their campaign on Kashmir? What new things do you want them to do? Things they have not done before.
Sanjay Saab will answer this question.
We were telling to our Indian friends long back, India is, if we compare the Israel and Palestine, or if we compare the India or any other colonial power who have, take for example the France when it was holding Vietnam, and then Algeria and others. I mean, the interesting thing is that the India is a country, where 77% people live $50 a day, according to Arjun Sen Gupta's report. The gross poverty, then India is then sub-Saharan African countries in poverty, and then if you see global hunger index, that India, the Bangladesh, Pakistan, and even Rwanda fares better than India. And now you see the worsened situation when you see after the COVID, the GDP has gone down, and so we have been discussing in the Indian civil society friends that there should be an opinion. I mean, there should be what is the cost of the occupation of Kashmir? At what cost India is occupying Kashmir? If you have 600,000 military persons here, and now, as Hameeda ji was saying about the Ladakh factor, now they have taken 2 divisions there, and then you have this. It is very expensive. I mean, you can't the occupation of Kashmir is not profitable. I mean, otherwise, the government have been disinvesting, any public sector. So we were telling our friends, so it will be long term, that it takes a time to gain, acceptability within the civil society, that there should be a debate between the cost of the occupation, at what cost. For example, recently the 60,000 crores for Rafales and other things. When you have such a poverty in India, and it is increasing. So finally, it is a public opinion, and now there can't be a shortcuts. And earlier question, what they were talking that about, there is also this again a phase. There's what will happen within 10 years. This is one of the phases, because in any occupation, there are different phases are coming. I mean, nobody knows that. But the question is that finally it ends up about the public opinion. It seems right now that because it is very hostile. I mean, in India, even nobody can speak about Kashmir, and even we know one of our friends, he was beaten when he came here and spoke about Kashmir. I'm talking about the Prashant. And then even the other, people who have taken a moral position on Kashmir, speaking truth, about India and about Kashmir, But these are the challenges. I mean, it seems right now, that I will quote here the Gandhi. He said that finally the truth prevails. There would be the moments when one is disappeared, and once these forces seem to be invincible. But finally they fall. And then finally the truth prevails. I'm very confident what Mahatma Gandhi said when he also was fighting against the British.
Thank you. Thank you so much. There's another one, another question, which is for you, Parvez Saab. Says, as you have briefly pointed out, the need to reach the international community, I think an important aspect is presence on online platforms, especially major ones like Facebook, Twitter, and Google. For example, if I search for Kashmir news on Google, Most of the results are from news agencies like Z News, India Today, and similar agencies. I know and we know that these news agencies are not credible, to say the least. What actions can be taken to make credible news and information more visible on these platforms and ensure that such misinformation is not spread?
I think the groups who have gained the credibility from last so many years, because they have to be believed, for what the reporters they are doing, and because the truth is a major casualty, in any conflict area, and but it is the intensive lobbying. I'll just give an example about the UN OHCR report, which they brought in 2018 and 19, and then they use our material, they checked it, cross-checked it. I think I don't have that the technical aspect, because I'm a technologically challenged person, as far the is concerned. But I am confident that one of the positive factors, which emerged after the COVID is these webinar meetings, which was not otherwise possible earlier. It has really globalized the world, and then we are speaking and passing the information.
So now we come to the usual mandatory question about the Kashmiri Pandits. So if Kashmir were to be free and have their own nation, what necessary steps would Kashmir have to take for Kashmiri Pandits to feel free, confident enough to return back to their homes? And how do you think Kashmir would ensure the safety of the Kashmiri Pandits?
I presume that I'm meant to answer this question?
Perhaps.
It's better to answer this question.
No, I think this kind of question can only be answered by saying that it's not just Kashmir which has to ensure the safety of the Kashmiri Pandits, but the Kashmiri Pandits also have to ensure the safety of Kashmir. It can't be an adversarial relationship which demands concessions only from one side. And I'm here talking about what has come to be regarded as the Kashmiri Pandit, which is the outspoken right-wing pro-Hindutva figure. So I think that I have, in the last 16, 17 years of traveling very frequently to Kashmir and meeting a lot of people, I don't think I have met too many people who at some point or the other were not troubled by the departure of the Kashmiri Pandits. How they articulate it varies, but that cannot translate into a kind of dilution or a diminution of what Kashmir as a whole has been through in the last 30 years. So I think that minorities don't necessarily have to presume that they will be cared for, protected, and looked after by the majorities. Sometimes it works both ways. I think sometimes minorities can also protect majorities by the positions they take, by the stands they stand by, and so on. So I'm sorry, I can't be prescriptive about what will make it possible. All I can say is that I think it cuts both ways, and both sides, if you're talking about Muslims and Hindus, or Sikhs and Muslims, or Shias and Sunnis, I think everybody has to learn how to take care of the other, and being a minority or a majority doesn't necessarily change that.
Yeah, no, I think that that really explains the situation so clearly. Now, there's a question here about, as everyone acknowledges, drastic demographic change is taking place in Kashmir. Is there any option to move to the ICJ to at least put pressure on the government of India to abandon such plans?
Parvez.
I'm not, I really am not expert on the international law, but these two institutions, the ICC and the ICJ, if we see in the ICJ the way the Gambia matter was taken, and then even the ICC, the Afghanistan issue against American was taken. I'm not an expertise, and I believe that the international institutions, like ICG, while normally the states can file a petition, or in the ICC, the Security Council can refer it. I am not really very optimistic about because the judgments are otherwise non-binding, except in few cases, like we have the Palestinian wall case, where caused the embarrassment to the Israeli government. I more believe on the international public opinion. For example, the way the Palestinians have started the BDS, which has to some extent, in very worked to some extent, and they have the BDS. I think is more effective than they taking the matter to the ICG. This is my opinion.
Okay, my question is for Hameeda ji. Do you think that the recent negotiations between the Taliban and USA has direct impact on the policy of Indian government towards Kashmir, since India was or is directly involved in Afghanistan? The negotiations had directly impacted its foreign policy.
Well, I can't say anything with any degree of certainty, but this is also a kind of speculation that if things clear out in Afghanistan, that ultimately will have a better impact if America leaves Afghanistan and Taliban take over the power. I think that will be a kind of pressure on India, because Taliban may ultimately make a move towards Kashmir. That can prevent India from further, demographic changes or whatever it is doing in Kashmir. The evil business which is involved in, it may clear some of it. And there was a question, someone say, don't be such a fool that you think that China will come to our, rescue. I didn't say that. I said the regional equations will change in such a way that if China keeps the pressure on India, that it can attack on that point Arunachal, Sikkim, this and that, that will actually put a lot of pressure on Indian economy, because it will have to mobilize all the time forces on all this border. And finally, they may come to a realization that it is better to resolve the conflicts rather than live in it all the time. That is what I did not say that China is the last country to come to our rescue so far as their own interests are concerned. But they have a claim in Ladakh, as Praveen Sahni has made it very clear. He has given us all the history in his video recordings. He has given that they had a claim on Ladakh from 54 almost, and it was an ambiguous kind of understanding that they have now settled on whatever it is. But last time, Ladakh, China was the first country which opposed this abrogation of Article 370, because they also made Ladakh a union territory. In a way, they grabbed the territory. That's why China had to come forward. And we have also heard from Praveen Sahni that China has been made with military drills in Tibet. There are 2 lakh armed forces there. And therefore, that's a huge pressure on India. That is why I am saying, if somehow, ultimately they will be, because no phase ultimately lives for a long time. Sometimes some good people come on the forefront, some sense prevails on them. They will be compelled by their own, compulsions, economic compulsions, to resolve the issue. And I'm not saying that they will restore 370, but they will to resolve the dispute, which is which goes much beyond that.
Thank you. Now, this is a question to Sanjay Kak. Please tell us about the current state or progress of the Amarnath Yatra and the larger Indian Hindu pilgrimage complex expanding in the valley, particularly now considering the possibilities of demographic change.
It so happens that last year, on the 1st of August, I was actually returning from the Amarnath pilgrimage with a friend of mine, a journalist friend, and I was doing that trek after 30 years actually, and I had gone because for many years it's been something that has really bothered me, the construction of that pilgrimage, and I think one of the contributors to this particular KRR report has an excellent piece about that phenomenon. And it comes out of an earlier report that JKCCS has actually collaborated with on the Amarnath pilgrimage, the militarization of the pilgrimage. So I have no doubt that the Amarnath pilgrimage and many of the other smaller pilgrimages that have come up in the last 5-7 years are part of a larger project of pushing little enclaves of support in different parts of the valley, and that it's a thought out strategy. Having said that, this year, as we know, the Yatra didn't take place, or it took place on a very truncated way, very small way. And it is I think it's a particularly cruel tactic, because if you stand up and say that this Yatra is destroying the landscape, or that this Yatra is overloading, or this Yatra is causing now tremendous inconvenience and hardship to the people who live in that area, it's bound to be seen as a communal and Hindu-phobic reaction, whereas actually it need not be so. So I think that we have seen many diabolic and cruel strategies deployed in Kashmir over the last 70 years. But quite honestly, the pushing of religious pilgrimages as one of the sword arms of this activity is something that deeply, deeply disturbs me, not because I'm particularly religious, but because I see the intractability of the problem that it sets up. Because the moment you say, that this is not done, then they say, oh, but that means you're against our religion. Then we can be against your religion. It's just, whoever thought it up, I have to say, had a particularly cruel and cruelly effective mind. And that has to be said.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're kind of coming towards the end of our time. So I would really appreciate it if you could just say a few last words or something you'd like to end with now. So if we could go around once with that, that'd be great.
So you mean panelists?
Yes, the panelists.
I think once again, I must congratulate Kashmir Reading Room for this excellent work. As I said, that this is comprehensive, that it is exhaustive. And from my perspective, it is the first draft of this history of this 1 year, but it goes much beyond that. And therefore, it will be useful not only for people to get enlightened about Kashmir and its various aspects of Kashmir issue and the Kashmir life and society, everything, militarization, laws, but it will also be of a great, invaluable service to the future researchers, because they will again and again come back to this report because there's so many authors and it has covered almost all aspects which have been impacted by the abrogation. And therefore I must congratulate you once again. And I also appreciate the questions which have been posed, means people are very much interested, they have taken great interest. I also congratulate them for being part of this webinar. And I once again congratulate you for the successful launch, and also that it will be of great value not only to the common person for getting enlightened about what's happening, but also to the future researchers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hameeda ji. That it's been wonderful that you could come and join us on this panel.
Yes, thank you.
So, can we have some comments from you, Sanjay?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that I know that at several points today, it has been sort of mentioned that what can you do in the face of such intractable power, which is what is the situation in Kashmir right now. And I personally do believe that this kind of work is the business of remembering, of collating, of digging, of delineating, of understanding. This is what will make it possible to crack that edifice, you know, because when you can't, you know, we know that the argument for Kashmir is not going to be made militarily, you know, it's not going to be made by forcing the Indian army into a corner. So it will be when the overwhelming public opinion, both internationally, it will be a mix of that and geopolitics. And geopolitics is also affected by how well you make your own argument and so on. So I think that I see this kind of activity. I never dismiss this kind of activity. And I'm not one of those who says that, you know, the only good political activity is when you're on the street and either waving a flag or throwing a stone. I believe that's important too from time to time. But this work has to be done. It has to be done very well, and it has to be done thoroughly. And I certainly feel that this report that has been brought out, I think it does a lot of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. That your presence really made a difference. So glad you could come. So Parvez Sahab, please, let's end this with you.
So I'm only, mentioning that it is very easy to start initiative, you know, but then how to sustain it in a long run, and then more important that how to make it very credible. These are the challenges for any initiative, and because we believe that integrity is very important. That too for a civil society group, because I believe it's a civil society group. And also otherwise in Kashmir that we have very little documentation, you know, we don't have that culture of institutionalizing of the memory. We don't have, suppose in 1953, how many Kashmiris died, very shocking for us. We don't know how many, that in 1947, that how many people got killed in riots at Jammu, that who were responsible for that. I don't blame it is a failure of the civil society, and I believe that the present suffering, the misery of Kashmiri people is also because of the failure of the civil society. I'm just going to mention here that when the National Conference after 1953 were observing that Black Day, when Sheikh was deposed and there was a coup d'etat. And but after they came to power in 1975, there was no more. It was forgotten. I am personally convinced that if that's what I remembered by the civil society, at least, because politicians, once they come to power, they are not interested in these things. Even if in Kashmir, if the conflict is over, politics will not be, politicians will not be interesting in punishment of the perpetrators, and they would be only interesting in continuation of the power. That's the reality. It's only the civil society which have a very important role, and how they can preserve the memory and do what the Kashmir Reading Room is doing, which I hope they will sustain it, and they will maintain the credibility, and then in the long run, I think that it will be a contribution to Kashmiri civil society, and also for non-violent conflict resolution of it, which is the primary aim of the civil society.
Thank you so much for all those wise comments. It's so important to continue as we've started. So just from South Asia Solidarity Group, I'd like to once again thank all the panelists for this very, very inspiring discussion. And thank you also to the many people who joined us to watch this, to watch and listen. The links to the Kashmir Reading Room report are available on the chat, and we'll also be putting them on Facebook. They're already on Twitter, on Instagram, and so on. So if you want to check them out, please do so. Tomorrow we're having a physical vigil for 5th of August, and hopefully we'll have a report there as well to show the world. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.